Welcome to the official IIA podcast with your host, Alexander Gannon. This starts. There we go. And now we are officially rolling. This is the official IIA podcast. With me, we've got two guests. One who has not been on the show in a while. One who's not been on the show ever. So we're happy to have them both. First, we've got the Dictatorship owner, Kyle Sutera, making his return appearance for the first time in probably a number of episodes. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. It's been a while.
It has been. It's been too long. And speaking of it's been too long, finally, we have the owner of the Australian Bushfires, Ian Kunesky, on the show. Ian, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right. So, naturally, there's plenty to talk about. It is trade deadline weekend, but before we get into any of that, it would be a shame to bury the lead. As it currently stands, there has not been any official report that has come out involving the Roland Pietryzkowski incident. That said, it does sound like they're concluding their findings, and it should be out within the next couple days. So once that is officially released, you bet we're going to have a large, in-depth discussion about it. But unfortunately, nothing to break here on today's show. That said, because we have some new guests on the show doesn't mean we can't talk about it for a brief minute. So, Kyle, I know that you were saying that after listening to kind of what has been going on the past few weeks, you had some things you wanted to share with the Iceball world.
Yeah, that's right. We don't exactly have any information to share, but we at the Chinese Benevolent Dictatorship want to reaffirm our support for our dear friends at Timco. We don't believe that Timco would engage in this kind of foul play, but clearly somebody is, according to them. So we hope that this investigation will be successful in rooting out any possible foul play going on in the IIA. And, we also hope that Timco is purging some of those unsavory elements that caused this whole problem.
All right. Nice, strong statement of support from the Dictatorship for the Timco Iceball Club here on the show today. Ian, do you have any thoughts on the Pietryzkowski incident?
I have a couple. It seems a bit too convenient that these series of events have lined up in the way that they have. I'm not saying Timco is responsible, but there's no real other paths I can personally see. And I personally think Kyle Sutera has changed a lot since the last time we heard from him, and I don't know how to feel about that one.
Really? How so?
He seemed a little more apprehensive of Timco in the past few podcasts, and now he seems a little flighty.
I think you're mistaken. I haven't been on the past few podcasts, and the Dictatorship has always been friendly with Timco.
Gotcha.
All right. Well,
I apologize. I am mistaken.
No, you're good.
So, with no personal slights taken, I hope, let us dive in to the meat of today's show. Now that we've addressed Pietryzkowski at least briefly, one of the main things that we wanted to talk about on today's show was some of the absolutely brilliant work that is going on behind the scenes in the Bushfires organization. Now, I don't know if the world knows this, but when it comes to Iceball analytics, there is no team on the forefront more than the Bushfires and what they've done with that team getting ready to make a run at this year's minor league championship. So, Ian, if there's anything that you can tell us that isn't necessarily like proprietary to your team's like success, what have you implemented like in the analytical world to give your team an edge? Like, what have you been looking for?
I really can't take responsibility personally. It's really the organization. There's a lot of really brilliant people under me. We have state-of-the-art technology and simulations to run all sorts of different interactions, and we've seen patterns emerge. One being that a lot of teams in the IIA don't seem to follow, and here's a little nugget that they can maybe start following: consistency. You see, on many teams, you'll have one or two really good forwards, or like one really good defensive man, and then the other one is lacking. And that's hurting more than helping. It's more beneficial to put your effort into spreading the wealth evenly between all of your offensive men and all of your defensive men as groups than stacking on one or two players. Because there's always a chance that that third player could get the ball. And I mean, if they do and they're not prepared for that situation, you're just going to have a bad time.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that's definitely an interesting analysis, because there is quite a lot of teams that do rely on like that one like star to carry them, and I guess they've all had very mixed results so far. I mean,
Some of my analysts have brought to my attention that this isn't always the case. You know, there's certain coaching styles that are very different and heavily prioritize certain players, and in those cases, then that style may work for them. But in the broad sense, it doesn't look to be the dominant strategy.
Interesting. Now, you compile this data, you do the research on it. How much of it do you implement into your team's strategy, and how much of it do you just kind of lock away as, that's interesting?
I'd say probably about 40-60. It's 40% of it's actually useful to me. 60% of it's more interesting. With that being said, if I make it into the major league this upcoming season, I definitely think more of it will become beneficial. There's some things that just with the few interactions between the four teams in the minor league don't really play out the same way as a full 16-team league would.
Interesting. So yeah, let's talk about that, because we are nearly at the minor league playoffs. Your team currently sits as the number 1 seed in the minor league, 1 game ahead of the Notre Dame Baguettes, and then well clear of the other 2 teams in the league. Do you think this is your year for promotion? Do you think that this is the squad to do it?
I definitely hope so. I mean, it looks like it's within our reach. I mean, the Baguettes definitely could give us a run for our money, but I don't see that happening. It seems to be that even though the numbers tend to line up pretty similarly, as far as luck and actually when you're on that court, it just doesn't seem to match up the same way as the numbers do.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely one of the teams to watch, as are the Bushfires moving in to these minor league playoffs. Last year, I mean, obviously came real close in the minor league finals against the Rubber Duckies, and then real close in the play-in series against the now Bone Crushers. There's a lot of talent on that team. I guess it's just a matter of having it line up and actually doing what you've built it to do.
Yeah, definitely.
And speaking of doing what it's built to do, we've seen a bit of a start and stop sort of season so far from the Dictatorship, and I'm sure it must be a little frustrating for you, Kyle, seeing your team start as poorly as they did, finally get some momentum, shoot forward back into the playoffs, and now starting to cool off again right at a very critical point in the season.
Yeah, it's been frustrating, and I think I have some insight into the cause of this problem.
Oh, do you?
The Chinese benevolent dictatorship always thrives when we are able to make a lot of trades. Our coach gives a bonus to 3 players who have been traded to the team. But people are very reticent to trade right now because, we're under quarantine. So we haven't been able to get the trades that we need to boost our team. And we're always happy to spread the infinite wisdom of the dictatorship, but people just aren't willing to transport their players, across the world right now.
That's fair. I mean, it's certainly traveling's never an easy thing, and especially with a team like yours that has thrived so much in the past off of dealing players to new locations. Your lineup has stayed pretty stagnant for a lot of this season, barring some injury, which has obviously it's affected it a bit, but not to a critical degree, I'd imagine. But it's certainly been a weird season because we felt that they were going to be one of the teams to beat this season, and they just didn't quite. Man, I mean, there's still 9 games left. You guys could pull like a Moonlanders or something and start getting real hot real quick, and then find yourself right there. But I'd imagine it's just been weird to see the constant up and down. Also, Kyle, have you at all been bothered by your team's amount of overtime losses this season? Because I know last season when we spoke with Comrades owner AJ Lassick, he literally made a trade and a coaching change because of the amount of overtime losses that he was having, and he got incredibly frustrated with it. Is this something that's been taxing on the organization, or at the end of the day, are you happy to at least get a point from the game?
Well, yeah, we are happy to at least get a point from the game. And I think it speaks to, the problem that I outlined earlier is we don't have the same edge that teams like the Badonkadonks, for example, have, where they just get a consistent, bonus to a couple of players. We aren't able to achieve the same bonuses, and that's showing in the fact that, there are so many times where we could have almost won and then we didn't.
Yeah.
So we're suffering a little bit under the current conditions, but we're hoping that next season we'll be able to come back in force.
All right. So with that said, both of you, while there has only been a couple trades, both of you have made a trade this season. And that's always encouraging to see, especially as we get near the trade deadline here. I know you've both made a trade. Do either one of you plan on making more moves before tomorrow afternoon's trade deadline, or do you think the roster you have now is the one you'll be sticking with through the end of the season?
So personally, I don't expect to get a ton of trades within the next couple of days. I sent out something to the Moonlanders. We'll see if they respond in time. That will be a pretty simple trade if it pans out. But otherwise, people really haven't been trading that much this season, and I don't see that changing in the next 24 hours.
Understandable, yeah. How about you, Ian? Are the Bushfires looking to gear up for this postseason run, or do you have the answer in the house?
I think that our main focus gearing up towards the end of the season is going to be put into just extra time on the court with our players, training them up. I can't see a trade happening. We don't have very many players on our roster. We essentially have who are main starters and one benched player. And no offense to them, they've been an extremely great rookie and learned a lot just by observing and sitting in on practices, but they're not going to be much use to many other teams in the league. So it would be irresponsible of someone to offer a trade to us who have little to give in return.
All right. So it sounds like we may be panning in on a bit more of a quiet deadline here for Season 8, at least from the people we've talked to over the show the past couple weeks, especially since the Dictatorship and the Badonkadonks who we had a couple episodes ago are generally at the forefront of the trading market. That said, it's gotten better in recent years. We're starting to see other teams like the Bushfires get involved in the trading game that aren't one of the Dictatorship or Bombay. So that's always nice to see other teams get involved with it. But it's trading in this league, it's definitely not the easiest thing. Just because while teams' needs can be so different, there's only so many things to give, especially with like draft picks. Those are hard to part with because there's only 2 of them. And we've seen teams in the past, while it's really panned out for them, or both teams, like they'll move draft picks on and they both do well. We've also seen times like the infamous Claudio Vronimir loan to the Tyrants, in which that backfired in the most hilarious way possible. So, I mean, no.
I personally think that was an excellent deal for all parties.
Says the one who clearly won the trade. Yeah, but with the trade deadline approaching, we are getting close to the end of the season. I mean, the minor league folks only have 1 more game in their regular season before they gear up for the playoffs, and the major leagues only got 9 games to go. And I think now we've been separated enough from the last time we did a quick standings rundown where we can probably do so while there now being enough new information to make it worth it. We won't take a super long time on it, but we will do a quick run through just to see where everyone's sitting right now. So up at the top of the table right now, the new Kansas City Astro Ice Chickens, 1 point ahead of Bombay and the Toxic Kings. Do either of you guys, are any of these surprising to either of you, seeing those 3 teams at the top of the table?
If I might add, seeing the Chickens that high is very surprising from an analytics standpoint.
Really?
Because based off of solely their numbers, they have no business being that high.
Really?
Now, our analysts are working because very hard to see if this may just be a glitch in our system, because most other teams, we've actually developed what we think the standings should be based off of numbers. And most of them are on level, if not 1 or 2 ranks above or below. But the Chickens are actually ranked number 1, but predicted to be ranked 12th. So either something is
that's a huge
very
swing.
wrong.
Wow.
Either something is very wrong with our numbers, or the Chickens have just gotten extremely lucky.
Wow, that is a huge swing.
The only reason I can think is the simulation doesn't take into account prior abilities. It's only how your team is right now. So I haven't really been following the Chickens too closely, and if they had an explosive surge of training within these past few weeks, that could definitely explain it. That the lag behind just hasn't caught up, but that's the only thing I can think of.
I think that the success of the Ice Chickens kind of speaks to what you were talking about earlier, Ian. I'm looking at the roster right now, and it's made up of entirely level 3 and level 4 players. So this is an incredibly well-balanced team, and their success probably isn't from their strength, but rather their lack of weakness. And it's very similar to, Timko. Alex, you wrote in the most recent article that Timko had a Cinderella run through the playoffs last year. And if I recall, they also had a team made up of mostly level 3 and level 4 players.
That was, with the exception of playoff MVP regular season MVP Haley Edmonds up front on offense. Most of that team was pretty well rounded. I mean, it was a complete team that just had one superstar at the front of it, but there wasn't any like huge holes in the way that team was created, which got them pretty far. I mean, they only finished 7th in the regular season last year, but they were able to piece it together when it mattered most in the playoffs. And there are a few of those teams who are really, really well balanced, like a Ice Chickens and like Bombay to a degree. But then on the other side of that coin, you have teams like the German Toxic Kings who just continue to follow the formula that won them a championship back in season 6, I believe, which is like balanced offense, have Axel Domashan in net, which honestly is probably number 1 on that list, and then just have someone playing defense. I mean, Lachos Garrett and Stacey Levine are solid defensemen in this league, as the stats will obviously show. But, you look at them compared to some of the other defensive pairings around them, like even a team who's lower down in the standings, like the London Loan Sharks, like you look at Kippy Bjornheimer and Malcolm Figueroa, and then you look at Garrett and Levine, and they're just in completely different planets as far as what they can bring to the table. But the fact I'm still mind boggled that you're saying that based off of your calculations, the Ice Chickens would be not even out of the playoffs, but like fighting down toward the relegation area.
And
that's honestly insane.
Like I said, the consistency thing definitely could play a part because we're essentially working with averages. And so obviously if you have one superstar player, that's going to bring your average up more than it probably should. So we're working on better simulations day in, day out. But for now, this is what we have to go off of.
Interesting.
And it's not a perfect tool by any means. It's just for us in the minor league, it's given us a gauge of, all right, here's what we need to do to our team in order to edge someone out of their slot.
Gotcha. Like what you would need to do, either like to work on in practice or maybe like a new player to bring in and how it would affect your team compared to.
Exactly. We can even work on hypotheticals. So put in, if we added this player, how would this affect our team? And we've actually, cool. I think I talked with you offline about that. We've taken a look at the rest of the teams in the minor league and have noticed an alarming pattern that if Bombay gets their stuff together.
Bombay or wait, we talking minor league?
Yeah, minor league. Sorry, not Bombay. Then is it Bombay?
Bosnia.
No, Bombay
Bosnia.
Is, yeah.
Bosnia. Sorry, my bad.
There's a lot of B names in this league. It's kind of ridiculous.
If Bosnia gets some major field work in, they have the potential to be one of the best IIA teams in history.
Wow. That's wild considering that team in its existence has 6 wins.
I know.
In like regular season.
I didn't believe it at first, but when you look at it, it makes sense. They have all rookie second years, I think maybe 1 third year, and they're all have very high potential. It just hasn't been tapped yet.
And the interesting thing too, I'm looking at the scouting and training points tracker right now. Bosnia is sitting on a lot of training and scouting points. So they could very easily gives their team some major upgrades that you're talking about.
And if you've noticed, I haven't said specifically what upgrades I think they should make because I want to hold on to my title. But if Bosnia wants to know what they are after the playoffs, I'd be more than happy to divulge that information for a price.
Yeah, especially since it appears that the first round matchups for the minor league playoffs will be the Bushfires and the Bunker Busters in the first round, and then the other series being the Baguettes and Tyrants. So probably good not to be sharing secrets with the enemy right before you go to battle with them. That said, though, that is absolutely fascinating on that. And that what you're saying in history, I think, is a very interesting point because this is a great time to announce something that will be happening following season 8. And it's something that Ian and I kind of have been putting together. Mostly Ian, I've just been being like a bit of a resource for it, but he'll be creating essentially a way for us to, through his simulation that he has created, he will be able to simulate games from teams of any season in the history of Iceball. And we'll be able to do like hypotheticals throughout the off season and be like, yo, what if like the season 1 champion North London Invincibles tried taking on their current day equivalent in the London Loan Sharks? Like, how would they play up against one another? So we can, at least through a simulation, see how like the old greats like Fletcher Donovan and Vladimir Shakovsky pan out against the stars of today. And I think that's just so freaking cool. So that's something that we'll be probably doing in the off season. And Ian's been great with putting that together, and we can't wait to see it once the season concludes. Also, one thing they'll be adding at the end of the season is we'll be putting each episode of the official IIA podcast up on the YouTube channel. Obviously, there won't be any video for the old episodes because there was none recorded. But at least that way, it's all in one central location. So if you get really, really bored one day and be like, yo, what was happening at the end of season 5? We can be like, we have that in a spot where you can see it now. So that'll be fun. But looking, we got a little derailed. I completely forgot where we were for a second. Just jumping back to the standings real quick. The middle of the pack right now for the playoff teams are the Comrades, Bone Crushers, the Rubber Duckies, who have had a good run as of late, the Loan Sharks, and the Bullworms, with the Dictatorship currently the first team on the outside looking in. Are any of those teams higher or lower than you'd think they would be, or is that kind of where we'd think that they would be at this point in the season?
I didn't exactly hear you. Which teams?
So, kind of running the middle of the pack, the Bone Crushers, Rubber Duckies, Loan Sharks, and Bullworms. So a couple former playoff teams and a couple teams who got some big overhauls in the offseason.
While he looks at that, Alex, how many? What's the point difference between each of these teams?
So in fifth, the Bone Crushers sit at 28 points. In eighth, the Bullworms sit with 24. And then you are currently sitting in ninth at 22. So 2 points out of the playoffs. And there's a 4-point gap between those four teams at the moment.
That's interesting. This has been a very tight series so far.
Yeah, it really has, especially in in a weird way where it's not like the points are tight, but the wins are different, because the London Loan Sharks have 24 points with a record of 12-9, but the Bullworms also have 24 points but sit at 11-8-2. Some of these teams are getting there through wins, and then some of these teams are getting there through points, if that makes sense.
Right.
I'd say the only real discrepancy, and it's not even that far of a stretch, is that the real data has Bone Crushers sitting at fourth, correct?
Yeah, fifth.
Fifth. All right, and the numbers in our simulation have them sitting a little bit higher at second or first.
Interesting. And that honestly might be due to the injury. Denzel Duval has been out for a prolonged period of time. He gets back, I believe, in a couple of games, but I think it's like an 8-game injury or something that he sustained. So that honestly might be a contributor to that. And then real quick, looking at the bottom of the table under the Dictatorship, Zamboner's in 10th with 20, and then each from 10th to 16th, everyone works their way down by a point: 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 15, 14. So yeah, the Zamboners, Mallards, the Moonlanders, who have been on an absolute heater as of late, Timco IC, the Russians, the Halfwits, and now the Iceballers, who sit in 16th in threat of potentially being relegated to the minor leagues of Iceball. And I think at least a lot of these teams we kind of projected to be there. I thought the Moonlanders were going to be better this year, but they've kind of come to life the past few weeks. So I think they're finally playing the way a lot of us thought they would. And the only other real surprise, I think, is probably Timco with their struggles. But that is neither here nor there.
Personally, over here, we have Moonlanders and Timco sitting at 9th and 8th respectively. So it's a little bit of a drop, but not anything to be too unexpected. And then the only real upset that other than that we have is we have a Russians sitting at 11th, but that is data as of recent. And as we know, the Russians recently took on the Bushfires former player.
Yeah,
which was a major help for them.
Yeah, they've, much like the Moonlanders, made a trade, shifted some lineup. The Ukraine Russians are an interesting case of a team where now they're starting to win games, but they're winning it through their defense and their goaltending and completely ignoring their offense. Felix Faber Jr. has looked stellar since entering the starting lineup a few weeks ago. Havelka, last year's goaltender of the year, continues to play well, as does Samantha Sekera. But offensively, they just couldn't score, and they really still have had trouble with that. Their most recent game was a 2-0 shutout victory over, I believe, the Halfwits. But only scoring 2 in most games probably isn't going to get you the win. You generally need probably 3 or 4 at least to be consistently in it. Yeah, I would probably. That said, though, I mean, we've got to take a look a little bit into the analytics world over there. Is there anything else that you'd care to share from your findings, or at this point, is that all kind of closed up as you get ready for the playoffs?
You know, there's some more stuff, but I think for now we'd like to keep that kind of close to our chest. I think that's
right.
the wisest thing to do.
Understandable. I mean, I can't say I blame you. That's I mean, there's been rumors about what you guys have been working on, and if even half of it is true, that's pretty impressive. Most notably, the development of Iceball's first expected goals per game metric, which, if that is true, that's pretty freaking revolutionary.
It might be.
That said, we're probably covered all we need to today. So, Mr. Sutera, is there any other final thoughts, grievances, or ideas that you want to share here before we wrap up?
I'd just like to say one thing. Free Timco.
Free.
That is
well,
all.
I guess the investigation will show in a matter of days whether or not they will be freed or not. Ian, any final thoughts before we conclude?
No, I'm just looking forward to joining the major leagues.
All right. Well, we'll see if the Bushfires can get it done in the minor league playoffs, which will be coming up pretty soon. Trade deadline right around the corner, as we projected earlier. Probably is a quieter season on the trade deadline day, but we will see if that actually is the case. But yeah, I think that's probably where we're gonna wrap it up for the day. So this has been the official IIA podcast. I'm Alex Yannon, again, guests of Kyle Sutera, owner of the Chinese Benevolent Dictatorship, and Ian Kunesky, owner of the Australian Bushfires. With that, we're probably going to call it a night. Have a good one.